So, when Jeffrey Epstein died in 2019, he left behind this legacy of just horrific crimes. But you know what else he left behind? A massive fortune. And figuring out who is supposed to inherit all that money, well, that reveals a whole story in itself.
At the time of his death, his estate was valued at a just staggering number, $600 million. And we're not talking about some old family money here. This was a fortune built over decades of really shadowy and mysterious financial deals.
Which leads to the big question, right? Where did it all go? Turns out, he had a very detailed plan, a will, that laid out exactly who he wanted to inherit his entire empire. But as you're about to see, that plan was about to run headfirst into a brick wall of reality.
Okay, so the key to all of this is a document known as the 1953 Trust, named for the year he was born. And get this, he signed it just 2 days, 48 hours before he died. For years, nobody knew what was in it. It was a huge secret, but now we can finally see exactly who he wanted to reward.
All right, so the will is kind of structured in tiers. We're going to start at the bottom, though let me tell you, even here, the payouts are anything but small. This first group is basically his staff and close associates.
So in this first tier, the trust was setting aside somewhere between $1 and $3 million each for a bunch of his employees and associates. A lot of the names in the document are still blacked out, but a few have become public. And I mean, this list really shows you just how wide his network was. You've got political connections like Cecile DeLong, who was the former First Lady of the U.S. Virgin Islands. You have his legal and financial people like his lawyer Erica Kellerhals and his accountant Bella Klein. And then there are the people who ran his properties, like Bryce Gordon, the guy who managed the infamous Epstein Island. Every single one of them played a part in his operation.
Okay, so let's move up the ladder a bit. The next tier of beneficiaries, they were all slated for $5 million a pop. And this is where we start to see some names that are a little more prominent, a little more public.
This group is pretty interesting. It includes people like Martin Nowak, who is a professor at Harvard with really close ties to Epstein. It also includes his household staff, like Valtsen Vieira Cutrin, who pretty much ran his whole life in his Paris apartment. And then there's the family of Turjay Rod Larsen, a former Norwegian diplomat, who once called Epstein his best friend. What's really interesting here is that the money wasn't even for Larsen himself. It was for his kids.
All right, now we're getting into the real inner circle. These aren't just your run-of-the-mill associates. These are the people who were, deep in the day-to-day operations. And, of course, his own family.
And this is where the money starts to get really, really serious, jumping from $4 to $10 million. This tier included 2 men who basically saw everything, which made them incredibly important witnesses to his crimes, his private pilots.
You can really see a clear hierarchy when you look at what each pilot was supposed to get. On one hand, you have David Rogers, a longtime pilot, set for $4 million. His handwritten flight logs ended up being crucial evidence. But then you have Lawrence Visosky Jr., the guy who flew the notorious Lolita Express. He was promised a massive $10 million. His testimony was so critical, they literally called him as the very first witness to take the stand at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial.
And speaking of Ghislaine Maxwell, surprise, surprise, she was also on the list for a cool $10 million, the exact same amount as his top pilot.
I mean, everyone knew Maxwell was Epstein's number 2, his right-hand woman. She managed his houses, his staff, his whole life. But her most horrifying role, of course, was as the key person recruiting and abusing young women. For those crimes, she was convicted back in 2021 and is now serving a 20-year prison sentence.
All right, the last person in this $10 million club is Epstein's only sibling, his brother Mark. But his inheritance came with a pretty big catch.
So, Mark Epstein has always said that while he knew his brother associated with younger women, he had no idea about the true criminal nature of it all until the police started investigating around 2006. The 1953 trust was very specific. His $10 million wasn't for him directly. It was supposed to be held in a separate trust for his own kids.
Okay, now we've reached the top, the absolute peak of the pyramid. These are the 3 people who were set to get the largest amounts of money out of anyone. First up, you've got the 2 guys Epstein actually trusted to handle his will. His accountant, Richard Kahn, was set to get $25 million. But that's nothing compared to the $50 million for his lawyer, Darren Indicay, a guy who, for decades, had Jeffrey Epstein as his one and only client. But even $50 million wasn't the top prize. The single largest beneficiary, by a long shot, was set to receive a fortune valued at well over $100 million.
So who was it? Her name is Karina Shuliak, Epstein's last known girlfriend. She was reportedly in a relationship with him for about a decade and is believed to be the last person he ever spoke to. And the trust promised her this just mind-boggling inheritance, a $50 million lump sum, another $50 million in a lifetime annuity, plus property, plus a whole collection of diamonds. Wow.
So that's the list. Millions upon millions designated for friends, family, staff, and lovers. But like in any good story, here comes the big twist.
You're probably wondering, right? After all of that, are any of these people actually going to see a single cent of this money?
And the answer, coming straight from the estate's own lawyers, is a hard no. One lawyer, Daniel Weiner, put it bluntly: no beneficiary gets a penny until all creditors and claims on the estate are paid in full. And who are the biggest creditors with the biggest claims? You guessed it, his victims.
See that $600 million fortune? It's shrinking, and it's shrinking fast. You've got legal fees, taxes, and these massive payouts to victims, including a $290 million settlement just in 2023. The whole estate is just being drained. By the time all the creditors get paid, there might be literally nothing left for the people named in his trust.
Which really leaves us with this one final powerful thought. Epstein's will, his trust, it named all his friends, his inner circle, as the inheritors, but in the end, it looks like his many, many victims will be the final and the only true inheritors of his tainted fortune.